All right. Well, I think we'll probably just get going here. So first of all, we'll do our roll call here. It looks like we do have, of course, myself, Bob Chapman, Stephanie Jones, Mark Curran, Jackie Stark. I see Antonio Adon just got on. And I think that Wayne and Dennis will be joining us at some point. But at the very least, we do have those folks on. So do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved by Stephanie, seconded by Mark. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say yes.
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 Great, all opposed. All right, that passes unanimously. And then we do have a public comment period. Sean, do we have anybody here for public comment right now?
We do not.
Okay. I did receive an email from one resident who wanted to submit a written public comment. So I'll read that at this time. I'll get through that as quickly as I can here. This is from Jeremy Johnson, City of Marquette resident. He says, I was raised in Marquette, Michigan, attended Parkview, Whitman, Graveret, MSHS, and graduated from NMU. I'm 32 years old and have spent the last year plus searching for my first personal home to own in the city of Marquette with my partner, Sarah. Personally, I own and manage a handful of residential long-term and short-term rentals in Marquette and one commercial property. I also work full-time for a prominent retail company based in downtown Marquette. My partner, Sarah, currently manages the downtown farmers market and owns one residential rental property in the city. In the last 2 years, we've seen 3-bed, 2-bath homes in the city go from about $180,000 to about $300,000. We simply cannot afford to live in the city we love and not just work in, but work for. As of last month, we had an offer accepted on a home in the city of Ishpeming. We will continue to work in the city of Marquette, but we will no longer be residents. Sarah will be commuting to the DDA office from Ishpeming, the second DDA employee to do so. I will be resigning my position on the City of Marquette Arts and Culture Board and turning my attention to the city of Ishpeming when it comes to my personal civic engagement. We both will continue to be active in Marquette and promote the city, as well as operate businesses and events in the city of Marquette. But as of May 2021, the city of Marquette has lost 2 dedicated, hardworking, and contributing residents. There is so much more to say about the situation. We are both happy to answer any questions. So that was again from Jeremy Johnson, city resident Marquette. And I think it sort of highlights the topic where we're going to be talking about today, which is trying to figure out how we can get some more affordable single-family housing in the city of Marquette.
Hey, Chair, Commissioner, this is Dennis. Just for the sake of the minutes, that beginning of that public comment, did it say that they had several rental homes that they owned that they sold and are moving out?
Yeah, at the beginning, I'll forward
Okay.
this email to the whole committee.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, at the beginning, he did mention that they own several rentals. So, in any case, I don't think so. We don't have any other public comment. So moving on to new business, do we have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from April 13th, 2021?
So moved.
I'd like to make one modification on the last page where it says Mr. Curran said costs are too high and rents are too low. Add a little line in there that says to justify new construction.
Okay. So we have a motion from Stephanie Stephanie, do you accept that suggested
Absolutely.
amendment? Great. So do we have a second?
Second.
Bob? Thank you. So moved by Stephanie, seconded by Bob, with the minor amendment there that Mark suggested. So all those in favor, please say yes.
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 All opposed? All right, that passes unanimously. Which brings us.
Can we just quickly go back to that public comment? Did they say that they owned rentals or that they managed rentals?
They said that they owned rentals. Again, I'll forward that public comment to the committee. I just received it, and wanted to read it aloud at this meeting before forwarding it to the committee. But I'll send that along right at the end of this meeting so you can all reference it. And then that brings us to our second new business item, which is a presentation from Ann Giroux. And then we'll also have kind of at the same time or one right after the other, a presentation from Phil LaMarche of Phil and Lee's Homes. So, Phil is, he knows a lot about modular housing, works for Phil and Lee's. And Ann Giroux is the director of the Marquette County Land Bank and also the Marquette County Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. Ann, if you want to take it away, and then maybe we can hear from Phil. And then my intention is to have some time for Q&A from the committee with both of you at the same time.
Yeah, and I do know Phil just messaged me. He's having issues with his mic, so he can hear us, but
Okay.
they're working on that right now. So hopefully by
Sure.
the time I'm done talking, he's got that figured out. But thanks for inviting me. I've kind of been watching from afar the work of your committee and kind of hearing from Evan as well, since he's working here at the county. He and I connect on housing things a lot. I'm not going to get into explaining what the Marquette County Land Bank is. I could probably talk for a half hour about that. If anybody is interested, you can check out our website. But I kind of usually say in a nutshell, we're all about community improvement, neighborhood improvement, blight elimination. That's what we do. And our overall goal is to increase tax base. So that's kind of the MO of land banks across the state of Michigan. They can be created at the county level. And then we also have a state land bank that represents those counties that don't have a land bank. About half of our 83 counties have established land bank authority at this point. And then of course, the city of Detroit is the one city that was allowed to create a land bank. So I wanted to talk mainly to you today, not so much about our blight elimination efforts, but more about housing. So that's what you're interested in. And I had just 2 programs or projects that we're working on that I was going to talk about, and I had sent Sean just kind of a visual if he wants to throw that up. The first project I was just going to mention is a project in the city of Marquette, up on Osprey Court. If you're not familiar, that's behind Econo Foods off of McClellan, and this is a vacant parcel next to an existing condo development that the land bank received for tax foreclosure. We've been working for many years to try to get a development on that site, and we do have a development agreement with a developer, which is a Nova Lab. And I think that your committee heard from Dave Allen earlier, probably more about his work in Grand Rapids, but he also does a lot with modular development through his new company, a Nova Lab. So we are looking at modular construction on this site. They will be condos. The picture or rendering that's on there is from a project they did in Grand Rapids. Can't guarantee it's going to look exactly like that. I have not seen the renderings for Osprey Court yet, but it's similar type of modular multi-unit construction. We're looking at 4 to 6 units. I don't have the pricing yet. Of course, we're hoping that they will be attainably priced, or at least some of them will be attainably priced. But again, this project, originally we were hoping to see it constructed this summer, and with COVID and other delays, it's just, we're not there yet. But it is moving quickly, and Nova Lab is working with some local folks to try to get the development moving along a little bit more quickly. The other program that we're working on is called MISHDA Mod. So MISHDA, of course, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, and they started a pilot program that we're participating in. There's about 12 communities participating in the pilot program of MISHDA Mod. We are the only organization in the UP participating, and I believe we're the only land bank so far that's participating in MISHDA Mod. But essentially, MISHDA will fund the construction of a single family home. It needs to be in a low mod neighborhood. So anybody that's familiar with these programs, there are specific census tracts that we can do this work in, and it's based on the income information from other homes in that area. The city of Marquette has has a few census tracts that qualify for low mod. This particular home is being built in the city of Ishpeming, and MISTA, as I said, funded the construction. When it is sold, they will recycle those funds and will build another home for us. If the land bank builds 3 of its own, funded on our own, they will then build a 5th home. And so it's really a way to try to encourage us to continue to build these homes and recycle those funds into building more. This is at 613 West Division. The side porch was put on yesterday. Front porch and finishing work should be done this week. The garage on the left is actually in the process of being painted to match the house. This project is coming in at about $195,000. This was priced before the cost of lumber skyrocketed. So our contract with Dickinson Homes, who's building this modular home, was signed last year before those prices really went up. So we're very fortunate that we got in. But just to give you an idea, this is under 1,000 square feet. It's 3-bedroom, full basement. We did put all appliances in, including a washer and dryer. Cute little home, but it's little. And yeah, just under 200,000 is where it's coming in at. In Ishpeming, we will not be able to sell it for that. Our plan is to list it for $179,900 and see how it goes. And originally we were planning for $169,900, but with the way prices have been and the market being as crazy as it is right now, we're going to bump that up a little bit. But just to give you an idea now, that house maybe would sell for $200,000 in the city of Marquette. The city of Ishpeming, the market's totally different. And I'm sure Stephanie can attest to that discrepancy between the West End and the city. So we do have a situation here where we will be subsidizing this first build. We, of course, can't continue to do that on every build we do. So we are hoping that some of the neighborhoods that we focus for our next couple of builds, we will be able to get closer to market price. So we're hoping in the next couple of weeks to get this home listed, and probably we'll do, some media attention on the program itself, and also hoping to list 2 of our other sites, both of which are also in the city of Ishpeming, with a to-be-built home on it, so that we would pre-sell that, build that home, finance the construction, and then sell it to a family. This home that is funded by MISTA, I've got some income qualifying information at the bottom of the screen. This MISTA funded home does have to be sold to an income qualifying family. It is at 120% of area median income, which is a little bit higher than your Habitat programs and other programs. They're usually at 80% of AMI. This MISTA mod program is really focused at that attainable workforce housing range. So it is 120%, a little bit higher. You can get a feel for, we're going with the 2019 numbers because that's when we started our project. So a family of 1 to 4 people, that's an $83,000 annual income. Going forward, using 2020 numbers, you can see that those numbers actually fell a little bit here. And these are county-wide Marquette County numbers. So those are our 2 programs that we're working on. I'm happy to answer questions about them. I also did want to mention, just before Phil talks about modular, I did see an email going around about a Traverse City low-income housing project that was funded through tax credits, which we call Litec, low-income housing tax credits. Just so your group knows, we do have here in your own backyard a couple of those projects as well. So if your committee was ever interested in going to see those projects, of course, Grandview Marquette was a Litec project, and they got historic tax credits as well. Down the road in the city of Ishpeming, Phelps Square is a Litec project, and then the newly built Jasper Light Senior Housing project is also a Litec project. So those same developer on those 2 Ishpeming, it was G.A. Hahn that developed those 2 properties. Phelps Square, of course, interesting because they used an old school, which is kind of cool, repurposing of a building. And then the Jasper Light project is on the former Bell Hospital site, and they did have some environmental, it was a brownfield site. They had some environmental issues, and they worked with our county brownfield authority to secure some funding through the state of Michigan through Eagle to deal with some of the vapor intrusion area issues there. Both of those projects required a payment in lieu of taxes from the city in order to get the tax credits approved. But I just wanted to mention that when I saw the email that, you know, we don't necessarily need to look to Traverse City. We have a couple of those projects right around here, us in our county. And then Evan wanted me to share my dream. Do you still want me to share my dream now or later?
That was going to be during Q&A, but please share your dreams with us right now. That'd be great.
We had a staff meeting right before this call here at the county. We were talking about housing and the new ARP funding and a variety of other things. And I said, you know, my dream is I want to do a brownfield plan that's a multi-site plan throughout Marquette County and do single family development. And the beauty of using the land bank is that you can do a multi-site brownfield plan. Otherwise, without the land bank, they have to be adjoining contiguous properties. So that's kind of a unique tool to be able to use the land bank in that way and try to get this single family development happening throughout our county in the various cities and townships. Part of the struggle that we have, frankly, with the property that the land bank owns is that we get it through tax foreclosure. And it's usually a site where we demoed a blighted house, and it's not always in a desirable neighborhood. You know, I'm not going to be able to sell a $200,000 house in some of these neighborhoods that we have property in. So our inventory is very limited. And so, you know, trying to figure out a way to work with municipalities to get more desirable sites to build on is something that I would love to explore with the different groups. But I'll stop there and we can talk more if folks want to later ask questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ann. That's really helpful. I'll ask, is Phil available? Is his mic working now, or?
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. If you want to take a few minutes and kind of talk about modular housing, and you know, that would be fantastic. So thanks for being here.
Sure. Thank you for having me, guys. So I'm with Phil and Lease Homes, and yes, we do modular homes. And I think that we are affordable. Modular homes are great because they come 80% finished when they get to the site. With the times we're in right now, we're able to still lock in prices for customers and get materials, which seems like it's been a difficult thing for everyone. Now, my prices have certainly went up in modular homes, just like everybody's have. But being that the houses come 70 to 80% finished, we can build more of them at a less of a cost. Modular homes are built indoors, right, under controlled circumstances, and built to the same building codes as a stick-built home. Now, we're different in the sense that we can't do everything that a stick builder can. I focus on ranch type homes, 2 pieces, with limited offerings. But with that, I think our prices are substantially less than other avenues. These homes would be built on either a crawl space or a basement. Similar to what Ann did with Dickinson, the difference between what I have and Dickinson is Dickinson's a custom modular builder, and they can build pretty much anything you want. My modular homes are going to be a little more simple. I don't like to use the word cookie cutter, so we have some customization, but certainly not unlimited. And to kind of give you an idea where our homes are currently, we're between $110 to $125 a square foot. That's for the house. That's not the site work, but that's a complete house, flooring, window coverings, fridge, stove. And that's us finishing the house inside and out.
I was just going to jump into and mention that we are planning for our second and third builds to work with Phil. mainly to get the price point down a little bit. We did find that the customization with Dickinson and even the design fees that we had to pay did bump those prices up a little bit higher than we were hoping. So we are planning to work with Phil. We've picked out a couple of models that will work on our next 2 lots that we're building on, and even hoping that potentially folks would be able to build a garage. You know, maybe the house is just priced less so that they can get a garage on that site as well. And the other thing that I didn't mention why Mishta Mod, kind of why the program came to be, was really to take that stigma away from modular and show that, you know, it's not the old paneled walls that we might remember from back in the 60s and 70s. It's, you walk into these homes and you don't know that it's modular. You know, the technology has changed, you know, such that it really is not noticeable. And so Mishta Mod was really the reason that they funded these homes, was really to put them out there like a spec home so that people could walk through and see the construction and say, hey, now we have these other sites that we can build this for you on. So I just thought I'd jump in and mention that as well.
Well, this is Stephanie. Can you answer the question that so many people seem to have wrong, the difference between the modular home and a manufactured home?
Yes, and I just was thinking about that when Ann was talking about it. So first off, we sell both. A manufactured home is going to be regulated by the government. It's going to have a steel frame underneath it, otherwise known as a mobile home or a double wide. It's going to have a 30-pound snow load, which is 30 pounds per square foot. A 312 roof pitch, which is pretty shallow. It'll have a title like a car. It'll go on a cement slab. It'll have like skirting around it. In a lot of cases, you know, what I see with customers is they look through these homes and they're so used to thinking about the 1960 mobile home that had 2-inch walls, paneling, and that would light on fire. So now, you know, so all my homes now, regardless of what they are, they all have 6-inch exterior walls. They're built with OSB sheeting. We upgrade the insulation. They all have vinyl siding, shingled roofs, vinyl windows. A lot of the double wide or manufactured homes have drywall throughout and look very similar to a modular home. Now, a modular home is built to a state of Michigan building codes. So like your stick-built homes, that has a 70-pound snow load. They have 6-inch walls standard. Insulation values are R21 in the walls, 50 in the roof. My homes have a 512 roof pitch, and they would need to be placed on either a crawl space or a basement. And these homes are placed on that foundation with a crane. They finance just like a stick-built home. Difference being is both of these homes are built in a factory, shipped to you, and then set on the foundation.
Great, thank you, Phil. Does anybody else have any other questions for Ann or for Phil? I had a couple, but I want to give the committee an opportunity to ask some questions first.
I just had a question about the Granville facility. And is that place full now?
I don't really have any involvement with it, but I actually just asked Evan that question this morning when we were chatting, and he said that it is full.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it has been full for a while. I mean, when I moved back to Marquette after college, I called Grandview and asked them, and they said they had about a 3 to 6 month waiting list at that time. Now, granted, that was a while ago, but I don't think that's atypical at this point for them.
guess I have some concerns, Ann. I mean, the program is great to get affordable housing in, but it's in direct competition with local builders that might actually build small spec homes. I mean, I used to do a ton of those exact homes and sell them, 20 years ago for 79 to 99,000. It kind of appears that that's a very disincentive to bring other developers in. Thoughts on that?
Well, I guess my only thought would be is nobody's building them now. I mean, what I've heard from developers is that there's no incentive. The profit margin isn't there to build a home in that price range. It's in the $300,000 to $400,000 homes. So how do we fill that need?
There are people building smaller ranch homes right now in Marquette County. I mean, you look at Eric Keogh, he's already done 3 or 4 this year.
How much are those selling for?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Because I think that's the problem. That's the consistent problem, is that it's just really expensive to build.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand where you're coming from there, Mark. But at the same time, I think as Phil noted, Phil, I think you said, you're somewhere in the range of $125 a square foot. Say you build 1,000 square foot house, which is about what the Mishta Mod spec home was in Ishpeming. I mean, granted, you still have site work and maybe you want a garage and things, but I mean, just the house alone is only coming out to about 125,000. Then it might be very challenging, I imagine. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't seen anybody building homes in the $150,000, $175,000 range, new construction in Marquette in a while.
And I know this is a city of Marquette committee, but particularly in Negaunee and Ishpeming, nobody's doing new construction in Negaunee and Ishpeming because the price is just, it's not there. And I guess the other thing I would point out is, Dickinson is a UP company that employs people that, built the first home for us, which is great. We hired local contractors, of course, to do the excavation work. We had a local builder come and put a porch on for us yesterday. So there is obviously it's not the full construct of the house by a builder, but there are pieces of it that are benefiting local businesses. It's also hard to find those people right now. We were lucky to find somebody to squeeze us in and get that porch built. Folks are booking out into next year, from what I'm hearing, for construction work.
I just get very concerned about trying to subsidize everything. You can't subsidize. Eventually, it has to end. Seems like all we hear is subsidize this whole past year. That's not a sustainable model in Marquette.
I guess that would be a question to me, or for me, Ann, that maybe you can address. And I do want to be mindful of time, but I think we've got at least another 10 minutes or so here before we should move on to Sarah. But I was curious, you noted earlier your dream of I'd love to do a multi-jurisdictional brownfield plan and do some more affordable workforce housing, single family homes throughout the county. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about how you would see that working, and what the role of the brownfield plan would be and all that kind of stuff? How would you get these down to affordable price points, things of that nature, and could it be sustainable?
Yeah, so I don't know how much the committee knows how brownfield TIF works, TIF being tax increment financing, but essentially with brownfield TIF, and it's not unlike the Duke Life Point projects, the Founders Landing projects, the projects you've seen here in the city of Marquette. There are costs associated with developing those sites. The developer is reimbursed for those costs over a period of time by the taxable value that they create from their new development. That's essentially how TIF works. That appraisal gap, and we're talking, you want to call it subsidy, whatever you want to call it, that difference between the cost of construction and what you can sell a house for, what the market will bear, some call that the appraisal gap. That is a brownfield eligible expense. So a municipality could choose to use the future tax revenue that that new home would create to subsidize that appraisal gap. So when you talk about a multi-site brownfield plan, and one of the stumbling blocks that I've had or seen, or it's been raised, I think in terms of countywide, because I've worked for the county for 20 plus years, and I manage the county brownfield authority and the county land bank authority. So it's a little bit more of a regional approach. I see that I could build this $200,000 home in the city of Marquette and probably sell it for $250,000, right? Stephanie can jump in and tell me if my numbers are off, but I know that I can't do that in Western Marquette County. But if you have a multi-site plan, you can cross collateralize between those communities and cover the I guess shortfall in one by the excess in the other. Now, some of the resistance that I have met from folks is, in the city of Marquette is, well, we don't want the money you're making off of the city of Marquette to subsidize other parts of the county. But if we truly take a regional approach, that's the kind of, I guess, the concept that I'm thinking of that you could make that work. Does that help, Evan, with what you were hoping I would talk about?
Yeah, that is really helpful. And I suppose, just so people, I guess, are clear on how that brownfield TIF mechanism works. It's the TIF is being generated by the tax revenue that's by the increase in the tax revenue that's generated by the development itself. So it's not like City of Marquette taxpayers or City of Ishpeming taxpayers or what have you subsidizing somebody's house, basically, in that sense. In the same way that, like, the city general fund isn't subsidizing the Founders Landing development.
Right. Brownfield is a but-for argument. If it weren't for the incentive, the development would not occur. So it's kind of that same concept. You're either getting zero tax base on a brownfield site, or you provide the incentive to create that tax base. You give up that tax revenue for a period of time, and then you have that tax revenue.
Sure. Sean, I'm sorry, you have something?
I just have a brief question as somebody who works a lot with brownfields in the city of Marquette. How does the payoff work for a multi-site brownfield? Like, so you build the house, when does it fully go back on the tax rolls, say in the city of Marquette or the city of Negaunee?
I think it would depend on how you did the plan. We actually did one multi-site brownfield plan, believe it or not. It was our first county brownfield plan, and it had a city of Marquette property and an Ishpeming Township property in it. And we treated them within the plan separately, so that it was actually a duplex home that Habitat built on Spring Street. That had a shorter payback period. It was like a 7 to 8 year payback, whereas the property in Ishpeming Township was an old school building that we tore down. That has a 20-year payback. So we actually did them separately in terms of the payback. So the city of Marquette did start to recoup that tax.
So this is something that you would establish more than one multi-site brownfields, like you establish one project that has 3 houses, and then maybe the next year you'd establish another project that has 3 houses. You're not just continually adding.
You can do it that way and just amend the plan each time, yes.
Okay.
So it's not a whole new brownfield plan, you just amend it each time. Yep, you can do that.
Do you know how that would affect the payoff period?
I think you'd almost have to track the project separately.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Sean. That's really great, and thank you, Ann, for your response. Does anybody have any? I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions for Ann or Phil, if anybody has anything for them.
I guess I would have a question for Ann, which would be just with your history with the Brownfield, are there any sites in the city that you think would be good for this type of development for low to moderate income housing? I mean, anything I guess that you've been looking at for a while that you wish you could work with?
I don't know that I can really speak to that, to be honest, because the city has their own Brownfield authority. I've kind of not focused much about,
Okay.
on properties within the city. But I mean, certainly if the city owns vacant areas that they think are prime for development, we're here to partner with the city or whoever to make that happen.
This is Dennis. I can speak to that, at least answer your question, Jackie, in that our planning department maintains an inventory of municipal property, and the Planning Commission looks at that when they come up with their future land use map. And there are two larger areas that have been identified as such. And actually, as luck would have it, I've been in communication with the company that may be interested in doing as such, but I can't really speak more to it because it really hasn't been vetted by the city commission yet. That would be the housing end of things. But as far as being prepared, our planning department has all that information available if somebody were to be interested.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Jackie. Does anybody have a final question for Phil or about modular housing or for Ann? All right. Well, if not, I have one last little question. Ann, if you could maybe just, I know this isn't related directly to the issue at hand of single family homes, but we recently received a letter about accessibility and senior housing and things from sale. And it just made me wonder if you could maybe just tell us briefly a little bit more about that Jasper Light senior housing development in Ishpeming and how the Brownfield Authority and the land bank were involved at the county level.
Yeah, I've had pretty limited involvement. I know, we provided some data to them when they initially were applying for the tax credits. I know that it did take them a couple of times to get it. The way that those Litec applications work is they're all point-based. So, the closer to downtown you are, the more walkable you are. There's a series of point factors in there. And part of that process is getting the local unit of government to agree to filter payment in lieu of taxes. So it did take them a couple of times to get approved. Once they were approved, I know that there were environmental issues dealing with vapor intrusion on the site from the hospital operation. I don't know, exactly what it had to deal with, if it was their heating fuel system or what it was, but they had a vapor intrusion issue that they needed to deal with. And they had approached our Brownfield Authority for assistance, and we were able to write a grant. Our consultant assisted us with that to Eagle and got them funding to deal with that vapor intrusion issue. So, they had project cost overruns in other areas, and so that Brownfield grant really did help them control the costs and keep things under wraps. And I believe that it's open now and maybe even full. I know some folks who have moved into it. So being that it's brand new might be kind of a neat thing, if your committee was to organize a tour to go look at it and check it out.
Awesome. Thank you, Ann. And then one last question I know we had from Antonio was that he put in the chat here. Was he said one last question for Phil. Can you tell us how long it would take to build like a basic ranch style modular home?
So what I tell people from the start, from the time we get there till the time we finish, I tell them 60 days. Now it takes us it can be as quick as a week to 2 weeks for the house. But I use the 60-day number because you still have all the site work you've got to coordinate. And I would rather tell you 60 days and be done in 45 than tell you 30 days and be done in 40.
Thanks, Phil. And thank you to both of you for taking the time to talk to us. I think this is some really good food for thought for the committee as we're preparing our final report, and we'll be having some more discussions about these topics in the future. And really appreciate you both being here and taking time out of your day. Please, if you have to get going, please feel free to do so. If not, if you want to stick around for the rest of the meeting, we'll be done at 12 p.m. So thanks for being here, though. And now I want to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a presentation and some Q&A with Sarah Lucas. She is the new CEO of Lake Superior Community Partnership and has a great deal of experience with housing in Northern Michigan. And so, Sarah, I was hoping that you could provide us with some of your perspectives and things that you've learned, models for affordable housing development that you've seen work in Northern Michigan, and what you think could be some good options for the county, or for Marquette County and the city of Marquette moving forward.
Great. Thanks for having me here today. Everyone, I really appreciate the chance to talk with you all. I've kind of been following your discussions and some of the ideas and recommendations that came out of your initial report. And you may have seen or heard about the webinar actually that the LSCP hosted the end of last month. We invited Evan and Ann both to talk about both the ad hoc committee's work, the Land Bank Authority and other county housing programs. And we also had an overview of Qpad's housing needs assessment for Marquette County. So have been really excited about everything that's going on around housing here in Marquette County. As Evan mentioned, I've worked a lot with housing in Northwest Lower Michigan. I worked with the regional planning agency there as a community development director for about 12 years, Networks Northwest, and then moved into the executive director role at a new organization called Housing North. So I have been talking about housing in a regional context for about 15 years or so, and like Evan said, housing was a big priority of mine, and it was a big community issue, big economic development issue, because as we're experiencing in Marquette County and other parts of the state, without enough housing choices, we have trouble attracting the workers that we need for our businesses, the families that we need for having enough students at the schools, and just creating that sustainable economy that we're looking for. So housing is a really key part of all of that. In my time at Northwest Lower Michigan, it became more and more of a business issue to the point where businesses were the biggest advocates for housing in the region. And in all of the conversations that we had about it, there was a very clear recognition that clearly we don't have enough housing at this broad range of income levels. We need housing for lower income people, for people earning, entry-level wages, for people working service jobs, all the way on up to professionals and managers. It has gotten to the point where even doctors and other high-level professionals are just having a problem finding any housing, whether it's affordable or not. There's just a shortage, and we could talk about why that shortage is all day long. But instead, I'll just talk about some of the things that the region actually did to kind of proactively address some of those issues. So when we talked about housing, clearly there was a need. We knew that the solution was we needed to build more housing, but it wasn't happening. And so we looked at why wasn't it happening. There are a few reasons why. One, and you've talked about all of these, but one was we have some regulatory challenges, whether it's zoning or otherwise, where it's difficult to build the types of housing that are needed by different parts of the population. And really what we're looking at right now is smaller households, an aging population. And, we don't need the big houses on the big lots that were such a predominant part of the construction landscape for so many years in Northwest Lower Michigan. So zoning was written to accommodate those larger homes. Now we have a lot of smaller households that are looking to move out of their bigger houses and potentially make room for families that could move in after them, but there's nowhere for them to go. So how do we create more small housing options? And a lot of that comes back to zoning. The other thing that we talked a lot about was how we actually encourage that type of housing through funding or other incentives. And in working with some very proactive local governments who wanted to be creative about attracting new development, we quickly found that there were there was a very limited number of tools that were able to be used in encouraging housing. So we talked about different tax incentives that had too many strings attached for any local governments or developers to actually use them, very limited geographies where you could apply other programs, and very competitive funding for some of the subsidies that could be attached to some of these housing types. So we knew that we needed to address policy both at the local and the state level in order to create more tools for housing. We also understood that even if we had the right tools in place, even if we had the right zoning, even if we had the financing and we had the developers lined up for housing, we would also likely have a lot of opposition from the public if there wasn't a clear understanding of why we needed new housing at different price points. I think everyone has had experiences with the Not in My Backyard, the NIMBYs, and how that can really affect whether a project moves forward or not. And so we tried to be proactive about getting information out there about housing needs and what types of solutions were available and how they could be involved, so that when a project actually came through, we had a more supportive public and we had more supportive local leadership that would actually approve those projects. And again, this is something we could talk about all day because it is a really hard nut to crack, and it's not something that's ever going to be solved exactly. But I think that there's a lot of things that we can do to try to improve the general understanding of what housing needs are and why we need to address them. But then finally, Northwest Michigan being a rural area with a lot of small communities that don't have staff, that don't have a lot of resources, how do we actually implement all of these solutions? How do we put all of the pieces together? It can be really complicated and time consuming for a regular project to get off the ground. But then when you're talking about adding in some of these incentives and looking for additional dollars to make things happen, there's a lot of capacity that's needed in order to bring all these things together. So we looked at sort of the infrastructure underneath housing development and understood that we didn't really have we really didn't have an organization that had the capacity to provide all of those different activities and resources. And so Networks Northwest received some funding from Rotary Charities of Traverse City and the Fry Foundation, and were kind of co-sponsors of this new organization, Housing North, which covered the same 10 counties of Northwest Lower Michigan as Networks Northwest did. And when we organized, we really had three legs of the stool that we were trying to address: local government roles and supports, communications, and policy. And I'll talk real briefly about each one of these, and then if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. First, local governments, we understood, and I think you understand, to be a linchpin in all of these solutions. And it's kind of a difficult situation because for many years, housing wasn't really perceived as a traditional role for local government. So there's a lot of education that's required to bring local governments and leadership on board. I think obviously you're already there, but we knew that our local leadership and just the public in general needed to have a good understanding of how local government can play a role in housing solutions and what exactly they can do. So we generally start with zoning. I think zoning can make room for a lot of different housing opportunities, development opportunities, starting with, what types of housing are available, how dense is it, where is it located, can you create missing middle? I know that you've had some conversation about that. It's not something that has traditionally been encouraged in a lot of single family zoning districts, but it's something that there's a lot of appetite for, I think, and interest in. That could really create a lot of opportunities for development. So other zoning changes, like just do you require road frontage? Just changing little design standards like that ended up freeing up some lots in some communities. So lots of different regulatory approaches that local governments can take there. We also really encourage communities to look at tax incentives like payment in lieu of taxes. Anne was talking earlier about the Litec program, Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, where payment in lieu of taxes is essentially a requirement for developers to be able to participate in that program. And they need to be proactive about actually adopting those ordinances to provide payments in lieu of taxes. But there's some other more innovative ways that local governments can be involved, and touched on some of those with land bank partnerships. She's working on some of these public-private nonprofit partnerships where you have nonprofits connecting with the land bank authority or the city to access land or to provide grant dollars for housing development. And then we have some even more innovative local government programs like deed restrictions, which is kind of almost an outlier. It's so rare, but we have one community that has adopted a deed restriction program where they're using that to incentivize year-round housing. So there's a lot of different things that local governments can bring to the table, and Housing North wanted to support local governments that were trying to do that. We actually created a program where a couple different counties have contributed funding to hire staff to coordinate these activities to make sure that these things happen in a timely way. The other thing I mentioned as a leg of our stool is policy, and this goes beyond local policy. This is really focused on state level issues, again, because we had local governments that were really driven to implement new ideas, new solutions, to work with developers, to provide infrastructure, make things happen, and then always found out that there were real limitations to what they could actually do in partnership with those developers. So that sort of triggered an initiative to essentially catalog some of the barriers that local governments had to participate in housing solutions. And we put together quite a list of potential bills. And because housing was such a huge economic development issue, there were a lot of legislators that were anxious to get involved, that were looking for solutions. And they actually they drafted it and sponsored some of this legislation that we came up with. And that was big news last month, because a coalition that Housing North was one of the initial partners of, put together a package of bills that was introduced by a bipartisan group of senators and representatives that's actually moving through the process right now. There's more coming. Representative Cam Benzie was one of those sponsors. Senator Wayne Schmidt was another one. So we have some good UP representation in that effort right now. I think people are really excited about that, because it is, we want to see some bipartisan action on anything, and this is clearly a big priority for everybody. I think this has some real potential, and there are always other things that we can propose to make things happen at the state level. Another thing that was a big priority for us right out of the gate was funding criteria for Litec. Again, Anne mentioned that program and the project in Ishpeming and some of the criteria that they use to award funding. it can be really difficult for small communities to compete for those dollars because of the criteria that they use to make those decisions. It's often very heavily weighted for urban areas that have more amenities than rural communities do. So we have, I should say, Housing North has really pushed MISTA to consider changing some of those funding criteria and has had some success with that. And then finally, we know we need more dollars for housing. That's never a question. There's just not enough resources for what we need. And so there's been a big push to fund the Michigan Housing Trust Fund that has existed for 15 or more years, but has only actually received funding twice. There's a proposal right now to actually allocate $10 million into the Housing Trust Fund that would then be made available for different types of housing development projects. That's a really big step for Michigan, something that we can talk more about if you have questions. But there's also a really big and potentially bigger opportunity in terms of leveraging some of the federal dollars that are coming out right now that haven't been allocated, and using that for what I think most people would agree is one of the state's biggest economic development issues right now, which is housing. I should say Housing North was involved in all of this kind of at the front end, but the LSCP has also been a part of the conversations on all of this and continues to be through the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance, which is advocating really strongly for housing funding and legislation to actually create more tools and resources for housing. And then finally, real quickly, I don't know how much time I have left, but community awareness and engagement was another big priority for Housing North. We started with having data available so that we could show the need, how many homes do we need for sale under $100,000? How many homes do we need to rent at, $900 or less a month, in which counties, in which communities, so that local governments would understand where they where they needed to focus their efforts, where developers might be, where we might be able to kind of attract some developers to actually participate in these solutions by showing the demand. We knew that we needed that data. And the other thing that it did was really elevate the issue for the public. And we had a lot of media coverage about, what are the needs, and that has parlayed into a lot of, I think, public interest in housing and how they can be a part of solutions, which then leads us to some of the grassroots advocacy efforts that were happening. Housing North organized a campaign to sort of show support for housing solutions from counties, from businesses, from community organizations that all signed on and are really trying to act as champions to talk about what housing needs are and how local governments and legislators can be a part of those solutions. We kind of built that up through community events, through media coverage, presentations, and often there was enough interest that it would coalesce into these housing networks of, local government leaders, businesses, community organizations, just interested members of the public who would come together and identify some actions that needed to happen at the local level and assign responsibilities, I guess, to different members of the network so that they could continue raising awareness about housing needs and engage local government in solutions. Having those champions was really a key part of a lot of the advocacy success that happened in Northwest Lower Michigan, because we had chambers of commerce standing up at public meetings and asking local leadership to approve housing projects, and really trying to connect local governments and developers to get sites or to get projects up off the ground. At Housing North, we supported all of those efforts with a lot of different resources, which you can find on the Homes for Our Future campaign website. I'll have the link in the next slide, but there's a communications toolkit that provided a lot of talking points and all of the data that we put together so that they would have that support, that information when they actually went to talk with decision makers. I'll stop there, see if you have any questions, but just want you to know, again, the LSCP is really involved in a lot of these discussions. We're talking with legislators. We're working with the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance try to get some action on some of the ideas that have been out there, and additionally some new ideas about how we might be able to create resources for housing in the UP. But I just wanted to call attention to some of the others that are working on this. Invest UP has been a real asset in terms of bringing people together to talk about housing. Qpad has just released their housing needs assessment, which gives us a really good starting point for these conversations. Housing Michigan has a website that provides overviews of all of the legislation that's been proposed or has actually been introduced into committee. And Housing North and Homes for Our Future have all of those resources that I mentioned for advocacy and communications. So I'll stop there and see if you have any questions, but thanks again for taking the time, and I'm excited to be a part of this conversation here.
Yeah, well, and thank you, Sarah, for, I think was a very informative presentation, a great example of how a very similar area has addressed some similar challenges. I want to open it up to the whole committee for questions. My only question right now would be, you mentioned that Lake Superior Community Partnership housing webinar, is that housed as a recording of that, housed online anywhere?
It is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so
it's on the LSTP website.
Awesome. So I will get that webinar, and then could you send your slides from today, if you don't mind, so that we can just share that webinar and then also these slides with the committee?
Sure, I'll do that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll open it up to questions from the committee.
I guess I have a question. Oh, is Stephanie talking? Stephanie, you go ahead. You go. Or not. My question would just be, I mean, I think we're definitely at this point talking about a problem, not just in the city of Marquette, but in the state of Michigan and in the nation, housing. And so while we're focused on things the city can do, I think it's going to have to definitely be a regional approach. But if you were directing some sort of housing solution for the city, like what are the first steps that you would take, either, as asking the city commission for things that they would need to do, or city staff, like how do we get started? What would you recommend?
Great question. I think you have already done a lot of it. I think obviously a place to start is zoning, and looking at what types of housing you do allow and what types you don't. And then also those little hidden barriers to housing development, like parking requirements and road frontage and that kind of thing. I think you guys have spent a lot of time on that particular issue. The other thing I think that is really impactful that local governments have done is provide land for housing development. And it gives them some room to actually determine, what are the right uses for land, to make sure that the community is actually getting the kind of development that they're looking for. So, there have been a number of communities that, and I to what extent this has been talked about with your committee, I'm not really sure, but a lot of communities will say, we have this surplus land, we have this parking lot that's not used. Can we sell that? Can we essentially donate it, work in partnership with developers to provide opportunities for development? And then whether they issue an RFP or whether there's a developer that they're already willing to work with, they can make things happen pretty quickly. So that's one of the, I think, keys as far as local government involvement. And then another, again, not sure how much conversation, if any, that you've had about this, but looking at actual dollars that can be used to support housing development, whether that goes, whether that addresses infrastructure costs or actual, development costs or purchase costs for the land. There are a lot of examples of local governments that have allocated dollars either through their general fund or through a special fund to housing development. And I think that, I mentioned the federal dollars that are coming through kind of at the state, in the state context, but there's also opportunities at the local level to use some of those dollars for supporting housing development. It's, of course, a lot easier said than done because you have to have the right project and you have to have some parameters about how it's administered. But that, again, is a really impactful initiative because developers will tell you when they come in, one of the things they're really looking for, really hoping for, is some source of gap financing, particularly if they're doing, like a Litec project or another type of projects that's funded through MSHDA.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. And that, I mean, and to clarify as well, because I think you mentioned earlier that housing, affordable and workforce housing is a big component or a big potential eligible expense that the American Rescue Plan funding can be used for by local governments, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure.
Did Housing North look at short-term rentals, either
Yeah.
homestay or standalone?
Yes. We spent a lot of time talking about that because there was a lot of concern about short-term rentals taking year-round homes off the market. And one of the data pieces I think that was really telling was we looked at the number of new housing units that were constructed over a 10-ish year period and kind of broke it down we also looked at like the number of new seasonal units that were created over that same 10-year period. And what we found was that our overall housing stock really didn't change at all, but the number of units classified as seasonal went up by 15%. And so what that looked like was our housing stock isn't really growing. We're actually losing housing units, year-round housing units, because they're being converted into seasonal use. And so in some communities like Charlevoix, there was actually just a big Bridge article about Charlevoix. I don't know if you saw it, but they, where they have 75% of their housing stock is classified as seasonal, non-homestead. And so they were really focused on how do we mitigate the impacts of short-term rentals? How do we encourage more year-round housing? And they actually created a new program modeled after one in Vail, Colorado, where they would purchase or accept donations of deed restrictions that would require year-round occupancy of the home. So that was something that they did to incentivize year-round housing at the same time as they were looking at how they could regulate short-term rentals through their zoning ordinance. And that was, I would say, that was a top priority for most local governments, was trying to figure out how to effectively regulate short-term rentals to make sure that, the new rentals that were being created in downtowns or the new housing units in existing neighborhoods weren't automatically converted into short-term rentals. And everybody came at it kind of in a different way, but all of them recognized that had to be a part of the conversation.
And it's a delicate balance because those non-homesteads, that extra mills goes to the schools. So, you can't eliminate them completely.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting balance.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, on your comment on deed restrictions, is that kind of where you were alluding to? What you were just talking about, the example in Charlevoix, is that they were just saying, okay, you can't do this, you can do this, or here's a plot of land that can only be used for X?
Yes, there are a few different uses of deed restrictions, and the way it was used in Charlevoix was in one example, the first example, they received a financial donation to purchase deed restrictions from a property owner that was going to convert a building into additional housing units. And so the deed restriction said you can only the property must be occupied year round. And that runs with the land. It's in perpetuity. There's a formula for how much those deed restrictions are worth. There's not a regular funding source for it, but there have been some property owners that have donated their deed restrictions to make that happen. There are other ways you can use deed restrictions to ensure long-term affordability. It's really common with properties like Ann's talking about with some of her projects, where you have funding from MSHDA and they require that the property remain affordable over a period of time. And there will be deed restrictions that say, it has to be sold to a low income buyer, and or it can only be sold, for X amount of dollars over, the original purchase price. So there are different ways to use them. It just kind of depends on what the goals are of either the nonprofit that's building the home or the community that's involved in the transaction.
And I think what a lot of citizens don't understand is that a whole lot of the condos that are built, lots of places, but in Marquette, I think it's probably 95% of the condos that are built in the Marquette have in their deed restrictions that they can't be rented for less than 3 months. So those are already in place in a lot of things that people don't realize.
Then Sarah, like on the deed restrictions, one of the things you mentioned was low income. Do they tend to have like a sliding formula, so as the economy changes, then the low income housing might have a higher dollar amount than maybe it did in 5 years previous or something? How do they do that?
Yep, that's exactly right. I'll try to think of how to articulate it. I haven't looked at one for a long time, but essentially it will say the seller can retain up to 25% or 50% of the profit of the appreciation of the property. So, the home might go up in value $100,000, but the buyer who bought it at an affordable price only realizes 25 or 50% of that appreciation. Okay. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep, thanks.
Okay.
Sarah, as a follow-up to that, the one thing I did want to ask you about, and I think we sent the committee in an email ahead of time an example of the Champlain Housing Trust in Vermont. So it's an example of a community land trust that focuses on providing long-term housing affordability. And I was just curious if you could share perhaps some of your experience or thoughts on community land trusts for preserving long-term affordability for homes versus this deed restriction model, which could be an alternative. What are the pros and cons there, I guess? And how does it work?
We had a couple community land trusts in Northwest Lower Michigan. There's one that's still operational. And basically you have some kind of funding source to purchase the land and build housing. When you sell the home, you're only selling the actual structure, and the nonprofit or the community, which can be either of those, can own a community land trust. They retain the ownership of the land. And so then there's a ground lease, they call it a ground lease, that the home buyer pays monthly or annually at an affordable cost, so that when the home is sold again, it is only sold, the cost of the land is exempted from the cost of the home, if that makes sense. So it lowers the cost of the home. A lot of times they are used in conjunction with deed restrictions just to make sure that the home remains affordable. If real estate values skyrocket, it's possible that even without the land costs included in the appraisal, it's still going to be unaffordable. So they might have a deed restriction to do, per Dennis's question, just to regulate the sale price of the property. Both of them kind of get to the same place. Again, they can be used together. The one community land trust that I was really involved in actually dissolved because of some real technical issues associated both with the foreclosure crisis and with how properties were assessed for taxes. There were some jurisdictions that were looking at community land trust properties as non-homestead properties, and so the homeowners were getting a really big tax bill. In the case of the foreclosure crisis, there were issues with banks actually recognizing the community land trust as an owner of the property, as a partial owner of the property. And so those became kind of overwhelming for the small nonprofit that was administering them. I think that they're very effective in what they do in terms of creating long-term affordability. Champlain Land Trust has been around for a really long time, and there's a few other models that have been out there again for years and years. There's a resurgence of interest in them. I know that there are a few forming, or at least one that's forming in Michigan. There's another one that I think in the Grand Rapids area, and then there's another one I think in the Detroit area. My only reservation with community land trusts is they require a lot of funding, and that's the thing. It's like you have to be able to actually come up with the money to purchase the property in the first place. And so I think that they're often I think you could get to the point where they're effective if you have a nonprofit or a community that's able to identify an ongoing revenue source. And in the past, and a lot of times that has been CHODOs, community housing development organizations, that would receive some grant funding from MISHDA in order to develop affordable housing or moderate income housing. So that's the biggest hang up, I think, with them, is just like with everything else, you need the resources in order to make it work.
Thank you. Antonio, it looks like you had a question. Do you mind just asking that? I saw you posted in the chat.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Great presentation. Really appreciate the information. Related to housing shortage, I think we've alluded and talked about material costs going up in the area and around the region. And then Mark also brought up a good point about maybe local developers actually putting up houses right now. In your experience with Housing North, was there a specific age group with more immediate housing needs in certain communities that you dealt with, or noticed any trends? Can you share any insight how those needs were addressed, met within the community discussions and local developers specifically? I think that's maybe kind of switching gears a little bit from our previous discussion, but I'm curious because I think there's a lot of elements that are kind of not pointing in our favor right now. Specifically, lumber cost is one small one, and you know, those things add up, you know, and I think the funding that you talked about is very important. So we're just curious to any insight on that.
Sure, great question. Inevitably, the people with the most immediate housing needs are those with the lowest incomes, and so it would start there and go all the way on up. Like I said, to professionals who are just having issues with just housing availability. But lower income households were and are a big part of the economy. There's a lot of service jobs that, with real estate values being the way they are in seasonal and tourist destinations, they just couldn't get into even the rental market. So lower income households have always struggled to find access to housing, and a lot of those needs were met with Litec and with other kinds of creative programs. There were a few developments that used Litec to create new construction. There was one where they renovated part of the old state hospital, which is now the Commons, if you're familiar with that. A beautiful building that they put apartments in for lower income households. There was one recently where a motel, an old hotel, was converted into housing. So lots of different approaches to that, but it all required subsidy. Another big chunk of need was entry level and people with entry level incomes, a lot of young professionals. That's something that we heard about constantly. We actually had a couple organizations that did surveys of their membership, of their young professional membership, and in both communities where that was conducted, half of the respondents said they had thought about moving because they couldn't find something that they could afford. So that was a big chunk of the population that we wanted to retain in our communities, and they couldn't find a place to live. And the challenge there is that, with a lot of the programs that are available right now, you have to be earning below 80% of the area median income. And there's not any programs available for people above that. Yet, people who are earning 80% of area median income, or even 100 or 120, can't afford to get into the market in a lot of communities. So they can't buy something at market rate, and they can't buy something that's being funded with state or federal dollars. So that was something that we were really trying to address by making development more efficient, providing more opportunities for different housing types that were maybe smaller and more affordable, at building more density into the community. So again, there would be some cost efficiencies just to try to lower the overall cost of development, to create economies of scale and provide more access to housing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. If anybody has one last quick question for Sarah, I think we have time for one more.
I would just add on to my answer, Antonio, that one of the things that we advocated for, and I think what LSCP will continue to advocate for, is that we do build some more flexibility into the funding programs and resources that are out there, so that we can address a broader range of needs, so that it's other parts of our workforce, not just those earning lower incomes. So that's something that we've talked with Misha about many times, and I think that there's a recognition that that needs to happen. When it will, we'll see. But again, the federal dollars that are coming through really create some opportunities to address that. And on that note, if I can just ramble on a little bit more, when I talked about local governments who provide funding for housing programs, they have the latitude to make those decisions about who they're directing those resources to, or how they're allocating some of those resources, whether it's strictly households under 80% AMI, or whether it's parts of the workforce earning 100, 120% AMI. So those local housing funds really give more flexibility to meet very specific local needs.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us and for sharing your thoughts and your expertise with us. I just want to move on to kind of the last point in our agenda. So we will likely have to, just thinking back to when we drafted our initial report, we had a lot of discussion, I think, at that meeting in January, ended up having to schedule a special meeting a few days later to approve the initial report after the requested changes had been made. Now, our next regularly scheduled meeting is June 8th, and that's actually our last regularly scheduled meeting. After that, we will all sadly be going our separate ways, but hopefully continuing to work together on this issue. And so my hope is that we can find a time, hopefully, or maybe early in the last week of May, where we can get together to discuss a rough draft of our final report ahead of that June 8th meeting. So that will give city staff time to go back, make any recommended or suggested changes or amendments. Stephanie, I see to Stephanie's point that she made in the chat about can we meet in person, that's an open question. After June 1st for that June 8th meeting, at least, potentially, we'll see. I know that right now, all other city committees, other than the city commission, are meeting virtually still. That's kind of something that's been passed down from the city manager level and the mayor. So I will ask about that. At the very least, hopefully, maybe we can get together for our June 8th meeting. Sean, I don't know if you can provide a little background on that.
Yeah, the city commission is coming back in the beginning of June. It's my intention to get the ball rolling on bringing everyone else back in person. I think the city clerk and I are going to be discussing that a little bit. But we have 3 rooms basically that we can book out that I think are the appropriate size, and that would be commission chambers, the Lakeview Arena Citizens Forum Room, and then maybe the conference room at the Municipal Service Center. So seeing how we can juggle the scheduling of those and start moving everybody back in person. You know, maybe early June is hopeful, but I think late June, July is kind of our plan, our target at least.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Sean. It's just so you all know the context behind that. I would love to get together in person. So as soon as we can do that, I hope we can. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. Of course, I will be following up after this meeting with the link to that LSCP webinar that happened a couple weeks ago, in case any of you are interested. You know, that Sarah and Ann and I participated in. Ryan Susi was on there as well, I believe, from Qpad. And then I'll also, once I get the slides from Sarah, I'll send those along as well. I'll forward the public comment from the beginning of this meeting to the whole committee. And then just keep an eye out, hopefully sometime today, for a poll so that we can find a time. I'm hoping Monday, May 31st through Wednesday, June 2nd, sometime in that period, if that works for people. So just keep an eye out. There'll be some more information coming out in the next day or two regarding the Housing Committee. But I guess I don't know, we have 4 minutes. So if people have any closing comments, I know, Stephanie, you said you had to get going.
Are we allowed to address public comment in this meeting if we had a comment on public comment?
Yeah, yep, that would fall under committee member comment at the end for sure.
I do have a number that just joined for maybe public comment. Do you want me to let them in?
Oh, sure. Yeah. If we do have somebody who's called in for public comment, I would be happy to let them make one at this point. We have 3 minutes left, so it would be just enough time for them.
It's this 250 number.
Okay.
Oh,
so whoever.
That's just me. That's just me. I had to redial back in.
Oh.
No problem.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, so if anybody has any final closing comments, the last 3 minutes here, the floor is yours.
I do find it very interesting with that letter that was sent in that they can afford to keep their rentals, but they can't afford to live here. And they have one short term and manage some other units. That kind of seems like that's just adding to the problem. You know, with the short term units. So they're making more money on the short term, whereas if we didn't have as many short terms, there'd be more homes available for people to buy and live in.
Sure, fair point. I guess I came at that maybe from that's a fair point. I didn't think about that, Mark. When I came at it, was like I was thinking, gee, this person owns a few properties in Marquette and presumably are generating income from all of them. They can't find a house they can afford, but that's a valid point though. You know, so appreciate you raising that. Anybody else have any other last comments here?
Yeah, real quick. I think I'm you know, obviously this person that came forward with being transparent about any rental, you know, generating properties that they have and that they're renting to people, citizens, residents in Marquette is very important, obviously for many reasons. But I think more importantly for me, what I took away from that is that people are leaving the city of Marquette that are actively involved, that are engaged, that are spending dollars here, that are now commuting, you know, 25, 30 minutes each way. I mean, I think that there's something to be said about that with the needs and the shortage that there is within that. We talked about missing middle quite a bit with the committee. So I do think that those are very fair and understandable points. I think our city commission or ad hoc housing committee should start to address needs that are not just for, you know, working professionals, young professionals, but also to Sarah's point, low income as well. So I think that speaks to kind of what is happening right now in real time, that people are making decisions to leave the city because they're finding more attractive offers or more attractive, you know, homes elsewhere. So that's all.
All right. Well, it is 12 p.m. I want to thank all of you for taking time to meet today. And then again, hopefully we'll get together just 2 more times as a committee. So towards the end of the month here, or the first couple days of June, we'll have our penultimate meeting where we'll be able to hopefully review a draft of the final report and provide comments, feedback, make amendments, and then we'll come back on June 8th. So thank you all for being here, and we will be adjourned at 12 p.m.